In a world where light and shadow wage an eternal war, where the names of heroes become legends, and where ancient powers awaken once more, today, the candle of a great story will burn again. Night had settled softly over the north, laying its cool hand upon the hills and vales beneath the gray mountains. A silver sliver of moon drifted between wandering clouds, and the wind carried the faintest scent of pine and distant rain. It was in this quiet hour that Gandalf the Grey walked a lonely road, his staff ticking lightly against stone, his thoughts far heavier than his steps. Rumors had reached him, small things at first, like scattered leaves blown from troubled lands. A trader from Dale spoke of orcs gathering where none had been seen for years. A wandering Bjorning swore he had glimpsed torchlight in abandoned passes. And then came the most troubling report of all. A Dunedain ranger named Arendir, sent to scout the northern wilds, had not returned. Gandalf knew the north well enough to sense when it whispered of danger. In ages past, the Grey Mountains had been home to dwarves, then dragons, then little more than silence. But silence could be deceptive. Beneath these slopes once lurked the strongholds of Gundabad, and evil has a way of haunting its old dens like lingering smoke. He paused on the crest of a ridge, looking southward where the world lay dim beneath the moon. "If Arendir has fallen into darkness," he murmured, "then the shadow grows bolder than I feared." With a sigh, he pulled his cloak tight. Though the night was still, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air. The road narrowed as he continued, winding between boulders half buried in time. Owls hooted from the trees. A fox darted across his path, startled by the sudden flare of his staff as Gandalf lifted it to survey the slopes below. A faint glimmer caught his eye, a light where no traveler should be. It came from a shallow valley veiled in fir trees, flickering like a dying ember. Gandalf frowned. This land had been empty for generations. No hunter would camp there, not in such secrecy. He descended the hill with swift, long strides, keeping his cloak close and his step quiet. As he neared the grove, low voices reached him, guttural, rasping, and unmistakably orcish. Gandalf pressed himself behind a fallen tree trunk. A small fire crackled in the clearing, and around it hunched 4 orcs, their armor dented and their blades rusted but their eyes sharp with purpose. They spoke in harsh mutters, unaware of the wizard's watch. "The chieftain will rise soon enough," growled one, poking the fire with a bone. "He has the stone now." "The stone will call them all," hissed another. "From the valleys, from the ruins, every tribe." Gandalf's heart tightened. A stone? What stone could rouse orcs to unity, a thing they seldom obeyed unless driven by some darker will? He listened a moment longer, careful not to reveal himself. "The scout?" asked the third orc, larger than the rest, with a scar that split his lip. "Still breathes," snickered the fourth, "but he won't for long." Arendir. It had to be. The decision came swiftly. Gandalf rose from behind the fallen tree, his staff gleaming faintly like a captured star. "Good evening, my troublesome friends," he said. The orcs spun around, startled, hands reaching for blades. Gandalf struck the ground with his staff. A ring of white light burst outward, throwing the fire into sparks and hurling the orcs backward with cries of terror. Before they could regain their feet, he moved in with surprising swiftness for an old man, striking one across the helm and sending another sprawling. The largest of them fled into the trees, shrieking curses. Gandalf did not give chase. Shadows swallowed the creature quickly, and there were more pressing matters at hand. 2 orcs lay senseless. The third writhed, clutching at its scorched eyes. Gandalf leaned over it, voice stern. "Where is the ranger you captured? Speak, for your time grows short." The orc spat, but trembled as Gandalf lifted his staff again. The old mine. The dwarves' mine, near the northern cliffs. The chieftain took him." Gandalf bound the orcs with rope from one of their own packs, not trusting them but unwilling to leave them free, and extinguished the fire. The night closed around him again, cool and silent. "The dwarven outpost," he murmured. "This grows darker by the hour." He turned north, staff in hand, cloak billowing softly behind him. Somewhere in the cold shadows of the mountains, a ranger awaited rescue, and a relic of unknown power threatened more than a single life. And so Gandalf walked on, deeper into the wild, unaware of the many twists awaiting him in the darkness ahead. Dawn crept slowly over the gray mountains, spilling pale gold across the jagged crests and chasing the long shadows from the valleys. Gandalf had walked through most of the night, pausing only when the path demanded wary footing. The orc's words weighed heavily upon him, like a hand pressing down on his thoughts. A dwarven mine near the northern cliffs. He knew the place, though scarcely any now living remembered its name. It had once been called Narag-Zigil, a modest outpost carved by dwarves of the Iron Mountains in elder days. Not a great kingdom, nor a fortress of deep halls, but a way station for miners who sought silver veins among the cliffs. When dragons later claimed the northern heights, the dwarves abandoned Narag-Zigil in haste, leaving its gates sealed. Gandalf had passed its ruins only once, long ago. He remembered the way the wind moaned through the stone doorways, as though mourning for voices long lost. If orcs had taken shelter there, and worse, if their chieftain held some relic, some stone capable of calling scattered tribes, then the danger was more dire than he had feared. By mid-morning, Gandalf reached a narrow ravine that wound upward between steep, echoing walls. Here the pines grew tall but sparse, their roots finding thin purchase upon stone. He walked slowly, listening. Orcs were not silent creatures by nature, yet disciplined groups could stalk the mountains with surprising stealth. At last, he came upon the remnants of a trail imprinted in mud where the morning frost had thawed. Broad, flat marks, the steps of a troll. Gandalf knelt to examine them, brushing aside loose needles. "A mountain troll in these parts," he muttered. "That bodes ill indeed." He followed the tracks uphill until he reached a ledge overlooking a frost-covered plateau. Far across this cold expanse stood the dark mouth of a cavern, half hidden by boulders. Smoke drifted faintly from within, catching the wind and trailing across the open plain. The entrance to Narag-Zigil. Gandalf drew a long breath and tightened his grip on his staff. Then he descended carefully to the plateau, moving from rock to rock, keeping low. The silence here was heavy, broken only by the distant crack of ice shifting on stone. When he neared the mine's entrance, he heard shuffling footsteps and the guttural snort of a creature too large for an orc. A shadow shifted behind the boulders. Gandalf pressed himself against the cliff wall, peering silently. A hulking mountain troll lumbered out into the light. Its skin was the color of weathered granite, its shoulders broad as a stable door, and it carried a crude club fashioned from a tree trunk. The troll blinked at the daylight, grunting with discomfort, but did not wander far. This was a guard. Gandalf sighed inwardly. He had faced trolls before, though rarely alone, but time pressed. Arendir's life might depend on swiftness. He waited until the troll turned its back, then lifted his staff and whispered words older than the mountains themselves. A soft shimmer curled through the air, gathering around the tip of his staff like firelight behind water. Suddenly, a thunderous crack echoed from high up the cliffs, an illusion, but a loud one. The troll jerked its head toward the sound, confused. Gandalf sent another crack, farther off, as if stones tumbled down in a great slide. The troll roared and lumbered toward the noises, dragging its club. It blundered upslope, smashing through brush, vanishing behind the ridge. Gandalf wasted no time. He darted to the cavern entrance, swiftly and silently, and slipped inside before the troll realized its mistake. Darkness enveloped him. Gandalf touched the tip of his staff lightly to the ground. A small globe of pale light bloomed, casting a faint glow on rough-hewn walls. The air smelled of damp dust, of rusted iron and something fouler, orc stench. The passage descended sharply. Gandalf moved quietly, ears keen for movement. Soon, he heard voices ahead, 2 orcs arguing in low, frustrated tones. "Told him the ranger won't speak," one grumbled. "Not a word." "He'll talk," the other insisted. "The chieftain said the stone will make him." Gandalf's heart stirred with alarm. So the stone held power beyond simple unity. It could be used on prisoners. That boded darker yet. Before the orcs could notice the glow of his staff, Gandalf dimmed the light with a flick of his hand. He advanced into the shadows, staff raised. When he stepped around the corner, the orcs saw only a dim silhouette, and too late. With a swift stroke, he tapped the first on the helm, dropping it like a sack of grain. The second leaped back, shouting, blade flashing. Gandalf swept his staff upward, knocking the sword aside, then thrust the creature against the wall with a burst of dazzling white radiance. The orc crumpled unconscious. The passage opened into a larger chamber beyond. Here the air quivered with faint, unnatural warmth. Gandalf stepped forward and stopped. There, chained to an iron pillar, bruised but breathing, sat Arondir of the Dunedain. His dark hair hung over his brow, and though weary, his eyes were alert with recognition the moment he saw Gandalf. "Gandalf," he rasped, "I knew you would come." Gandalf hurried to him and began undoing the chains. "We must move swiftly. Where is the orc chieftain?" Arondir swallowed and pointed deeper into the mine. "Below, beyond the lower hall. They have found something, Gandalf. Something ancient that should have remained buried." Gandalf's face grew grave. "The stone?" "Yes," Arondir breathed. "But it is no mere trinket. It hums, as though alive." A tremor rolled through the ground, deep, distant, like something stirring far beneath the stone floors. Gandalf steadied him. "Come, my friend. Whatever waits in these depths, we shall face it, but not alone and not unprepared." Together they turned toward the dark stairway leading further into Narag-Zegil, unaware that the true peril waited in the blackness below, clutching the ancient stone and gathering strength with every passing moment. The stairway into the lower halls felt more like the throat of some buried beast than a passage shaped by dwarven hands. The walls dripped with moisture, and the air grew warmer as Gandalf and Arondir descended. Their footsteps echoed softly, swallowed by the vastness of the abandoned mine. Gandalf kept his staff dim, for any greater glow might betray them, and for a moment it seemed as though the darkness leaned inward, eager to reclaim its dominion. Arondir moved stiffly from his time in chains, but his voice, though low, held its strength. "The orc chieftain calls himself Mogthul, a remnant of Gundabad. They follow him with a zeal I have never seen. And the stone..." He paused, as if the memory tightened around his throat. When they brought it out from the lower vault, every orc in the chamber knelt without command. Gandalf's brows knitted. A relic of the North. It must be older than Gundabad itself, and if Mogthul believes it is his right to wield it, then he is more ambitious than most of his kind. A new sound drifted up the stairwell, distant chanting, steady as a drumbeat. It rose and fell like a pulse, thick with malice. The wizard halted, one hand raised. Arondir froze beside him. Voices, dozens, maybe more. Gandalf whispered, "They are gathered, which means Mogthul is near." They crept down the final steps and found themselves at the mouth of a vast chamber, once a grand dwarven hall. Though the carvings on the pillars had long since chipped away, their shapes were clear. Wolves, ravens, and mountains, all symbols of endurance and guardianship. Now they stood like silent witnesses to a corruption that had seeped into their home. Below, in the great hollow of the chamber, orcs encircled a crumbling platform where Mogthul towered above them. He was massive even for his kind, clad in pieced-together armor and bearing a jagged scar that ran from brow to cheek. In his outstretched hand gleamed the stone. It was no simple gem. Even at a distance, Gandalf saw the sickly shimmer within it, like a star drowned in black water, flickering and struggling to be free. The air hummed, faint but unmistakable, as though the stone itself breathed. Mogthul lifted it high. "Hear it," he roared. "Hear the call of the old masters. The stone remembers what once ruled these mountains. It shall rise again, and with it, so shall we." A ripple of fervor surged through the assembled orcs. Some beat their chests. Others slammed their weapons against the ground. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural fever. Gandalf steadied Arondir with a hand. If he succeeds in binding the tribes, the North will fall into endless raids. There will be no peace from Dale to the Shire. Arondir nodded grimly. Then we must stop him now. But before they could take another step, the humming grew louder, much louder. The stone pulsed, casting a pale, poisonous light across the hall. Mogthul grinned with savage delight. "Awaken," he growled. "Awaken as in ages long past." A tremor shook the chamber. Dust rained from the ceiling. Cracks spidered across the pillars. Gandalf felt a force rolling through the stone beneath his feet. An old presence stirred, not of flesh, but of memory, bound to the darkness of the mine. Gandalf whispered, "The fool. He seeks to rouse whatever lies sealed below." The trembling grew. An icy draft swept upward from the fissures in the floor, carrying with it a whisper that was not wind. Orcs faltered, their cries turning from zeal to unease. Mogthul's eyes widened, not with fear, but triumph. He raised the stone once more. That was when Gandalf acted. With a sharp cry, he strode from the shadows and struck his staff hard upon the ground. A great flash of silver-blue light burst across the hall, scattering the nearest orcs and silencing their chants. "Mogthul of Gundabad," Gandalf called, his voice ringing against the stone. "You meddle with forces far older and far darker than you can comprehend." The chieftain snarled, gripping the stone tighter. "Grey wizard, I knew the tribes feared you, but I do not." His followers surged forward with a roar. Gandalf thrust his staff outward, a shield of light erupting before him. The leading orcs crashed into it and tumbled backward. Behind him, Arondir drew his sword. Though battered and weary, the ranger stood ready to defend their narrow ledge. But Mogthul did not join the charge. Instead, he held the stone close, whispering words in a tongue not meant for mortal speech. The light within the relic flared. The hall shook violently. A deep rumble rolled through the ground, and a crack tore open beside the platform, spilling blackness into the chamber. From the fissure rose a sound like 1,000 rusted chains scraping stone. "Enough!" Gandalf shouted. You endanger even your own kind." Mogthul laughed. "Let the mountain break. With this stone, even the ancient spirits will bow." Gandalf drew a long breath. He lifted his staff high, gathering strength. Silver light spiraled upward, brighter and brighter. "Arondir, hold the line." The ranger fought at his side, driving back orcs that scrambled up the ledge. Gandalf stepped forward, staff blazing, and sent a bolt of light screaming toward the platform. Mogthul flung up the stone. The bolt struck it, and the entire hall exploded with white fire. The shockwave hurled orcs to the ground. Cracks raced across the floor. A low wail rose from the depths, echoing through the mine like the cry of something long imprisoned. When the light faded, Mogthul knelt, clutching the stone, eyes wide with pain, but filled with stubborn fury. Gandalf realized something then. The stone had not shattered. It had absorbed the spell, and now it glowed brighter than before. Mogthul staggered to his feet. "You give it strength, wizard. Strike again, and it will claim the halls of the north for all time." Gandalf's blood ran cold. He lowered his staff. A direct blow would only empower the relic. It needed to be removed or sealed. But the hall was collapsing. Dust and stone rained from above in great sheets. Orcs fled in panic. The fissure widened across the platform, splitting Mogthul's footing. Arondir shouted, "Gandalf, the chamber won't hold much longer." The wizard looked to the depths, then to the chieftain, then to the stone burning like a cold star in his hand. His decision had to be swift. He turned to Arondir. "We must cut off Mogthul from the relic, drive him toward the northern wall. There is an old sealing mechanism there, dwarven made. It may yet hold." Arondir nodded, though the plan was perilous. Together they advanced into the chaos, the chamber groaning around them, as Mogthul raised the stone once more, determined to unleash its full terror before they could reach him. The battle for the lower hall had begun, and the weight of an ancient burden pressed heavier upon Gandalf's heart with each passing heartbeat. The chamber roared like a wounded mountain as Gandalf and Arondir pressed forward, the ground trembling beneath each stride. Dust clouded the air. Pillars cracked like old bones, and the cries of fleeing orcs echoed through the collapsing hall. Mogthul stood amid the chaos, the stone burning in his fist with cold, merciless light, as though it had awakened to some long-forgotten hunger. Gandalf felt the weight of the place tightening around him. Narg-Zegal had been carved with pride, its pillars anchored deep into stone, but no hall could withstand such forces forever. The rumbling from beneath grew stronger, accompanied now by a terrible groaning voice. No words, only the echo of ancient wrath. Whatever spirit slumbered here had been bound in ages long past by hands wiser than Mogthul's. Now the stone tugged at those bindings. Arondir shielded his face as a boulder crashed down near his feet. "If we tarry, we will be buried alive." "Then we shall not tarry," Gandalf answered, his voice cutting through the din like a drawn blade. "Keep close to me." Together they descended from the narrow ledge into the main hall. Orcs scattered before the wizard's light, too frightened to fight, too desperate to flee. Some clawed toward the tunnel exits, others scrambled over fallen stones, but none dared approach Mogthul now. The chieftain stood alone upon the shattered platform, wrapped in the stone's unnatural radiance. His armor gleamed as though slick with frost, and the scar across his face seemed to burn like a brand. "Mogthul," Gandalf called, advancing with measured steps. "Cast down the stone. It does not heed you. It consumes you." The orc chieftain laughed, though his voice cracked. "Consumes? No, wizard. It lifts me. For too long our kind has skulked like rats in ruins, but with this..." He lifted the stone higher. The ancient power of the North rises at my command." Another tremor split the floor. The great fissure widened, and a blast of icy air rushed out, scouring the hall. Arondir staggered back. Gandalf held firm, though the chill scraped against his bones like the touch of deep winter. "You think yourself master," Gandalf said, "but you are only a vessel. That which dwells beneath Narg-Zegal was sealed by dwarves of old, because its malice threatened even them. It will obey neither orc nor wizard. Break your hold upon it, or you will bring doom upon all who dwell in these mountains." But Mogthul's eyes shone with wild pride. "Let doom come, if it brings glory." He thrust the stone toward Gandalf. A wave of force surged outward, scattering debris and knocking Arondir to his knees. Gandalf braced his staff against the floor, channeling his strength to withstand the blast. Sparks burst like silver stars around him as the power met his shield. "Mogthul!" he shouted again. "If you awaken that which slumbers, it will devour you first." For the first time, doubt flickered in the chieftain's eyes. But before he could answer, the fissure erupted with a shuddering roar. A column of shadow burst upward, shapeless yet vast, swirling with forms half-glimpsed, claws like smoke, a face without features, a memory of rage given shape. The temperature plunged, frost racing across the floor in jagged patterns. Arondir whispered, "What is it?" "A spirit of the deep," Gandalf replied, voice low, strained, one that should never have been roused. The shadow leaned toward Mogthul, drawn by the stone's radiance. The chieftain's bravado faltered, his legs stiffened, sweat glistened on his brow despite the freezing air. "No," he muttered, "it obeys me." But the spirit did not obey. It hungered. The stone pulsed violently, pulling at him like a magnet drawing iron. Mogthul fought against it, digging his heels into the stone platform. His roar was no longer triumphant, but terrified. Gandalf seized the moment. "Arondir!" he cried. "To the northern wall!" The ranger sprang to his feet and followed Gandalf along the crumbling hall. Behind the platform, carved into a section of untouched stone, stood a great iron mechanism, a relic from the dwarves' craft. It resembled the head of a ram, fashioned from blackened steel with intricate runes etched along its horns. Beneath it lay a circular seal, a gate designed to lock or bind something within the mountain's depths. Gandalf rested a hand upon the runes. They glowed faintly, as though remembering an old friend. "This seal was forged for this very moment," he murmured. "But it requires strength, more than mine alone. The stone must be brought to it." Arondir's breath caught. "You mean, he must be brought to it?" Gandalf nodded grimly. "Aye, Mogthul holds it too tightly to separate, but the spirit wants the stone more than it wants him. If we can direct its pull, it may drive him to where he must go." It was a perilous plan, perhaps madness, yet no better choice remained. Gandalf raised his staff and summoned a sphere of bright light, casting it toward the fissure. The chamber illuminated in sudden brilliance. The shadow recoiled, twisting and shrieking. Mogthul staggered as the stone jerked violently toward the northern wall, guided not by his will, but by the spirit's own greed. "No!" he bellowed, but his feet slid helplessly across the stone. Gandalf guided the pull with sweeping gestures, shaping the current of force like a shepherd steering a wild beast. Arondir braced himself beside the seal, ready to strike should Mogthul reach them. The orc chieftain fought, clawing at the ground, at broken stones, at anything to slow his advance, but the stone dragged him onward, inch by inch. "Stand ready!" Gandalf called. Mogthul crashed against the seal, his fists pounding it with desperate fury. The spirit lunged behind him, its formless body spilling across the platform like black water. Gandalf shouted a final command in the tongue of ancient craft. The runes blazed. The iron ram's jaws snapped shut, clamping over the stone with a deafening clang. Mogthul shrieked as the relic was ripped from his grasp. The spirit surged forward, but the seal drank its shadow like a thirsty well. The chamber rocked with a thunderous boom as the gate sealed itself, locking both spirit and stone behind its ruined surface. Then, at last, silence. The rumbling faded, the frost melted, the fissure sealed with a grinding sound as the mountain settled once more into uneasy rest. Mogthul collapsed, gasping, stripped of his power, and nearly senseless. Arondir bound him swiftly, though the chieftain offered no resistance. He stared only at the sealed gate, trembling like a beast robbed of its last hope. Gandalf leaned upon his staff, breath unsteady. It is done, for now. But in his heart he felt the weight of what had nearly been unleashed, and he knew this victory carried its own burden, one that would follow him long after they left the dark halls of Narag-Zagil behind. The stillness that followed was heavy, as though the mountain itself held its breath. Dust drifted from the rafters in lazy spirals, and the glow of the runes upon the sealed gate pulsed once, then faded into quiet embers. Gandalf stood motionless for several heartbeats, listening for any whisper, any tremor, any sign that the spirit still clawed at the edges of its new prison. But no sound came. The silence was complete. Arondir let out a long breath and leaned against a broken pillar. "By the grace of the Valor," he murmured, "I did not think we would escape this place alive." Gandalf placed a hand upon his shoulder. "Courage endured, and that is its own reward. But we are not finished here. Come, we must leave this hall before it collapses entirely." Mogthul lay in a crumpled heap at the foot of the seal, his hands trembling with the shock of what had transpired. The strength had drained from him. Without the stone's influence, he seemed smaller, less a chieftain, and more a broken remnant of Gundabad's fading fury. His yellowed eyes flicked toward Gandalf as the wizard approached, but no defiance remained, only a hollow dread. "You sought power beyond your reckoning," Gandalf said, his voice firm but not cruel. "And in doing so nearly brought ruin upon your own kind. What came upon you, Mogthul? Orcs are not known for schemes such as this." The chieftain swallowed hard, his breath ragged. "It called to me," he rasped. "Not in words, in dreams, a voice from stone and shadow, promising strength, promising dominion, promising that the scattered tribes would kneel." Gandalf frowned. The stone spoke with no voice of its own. Something older guided it, something that watched from within the dark. Mogthul shuddered. "It made me believe I could master it." "No," Gandalf said quietly. "It sought to master you." The chieftain bowed his head. "Then kill me, wizard, for I have failed. My warriors have fled. My purpose is dust." Arondir stepped forward, hand on his sword, but Gandalf raised a staying hand. "No, death would teach nothing. You will leave this place with us. What becomes of you will be decided by those whose lands you threatened." Mogthul snarled weakly, but whether from hatred or shame, Gandalf could not tell. He did not resist as Arondir bound him once more with stout rope. The hall trembled again, less violently, but a warning all the same. Gandalf straightened. "The mountain settles. We must go." They made their way toward the upper passages, stepping over fallen stones and discarded weapons. The torches that orcs had set sputtered weakly, their flames gasping against the chill that lingered from the spirit's passing. Gandalf led the way with his staff held high, its glow returning in soft, steady radiance. As they reached a narrower corridor, Arondir broke the silence. The spirit, Was it of the same kind as those that haunt the deep places beneath Moria? Gandalf's brows drew together. Not the same, but kin in darkness. Many spirits roamed the world before the shaping of its lands. Some were bound by craft, some by malice, and some by vows long forgotten. The dwarves sealed this one with great cost, I deem. Had Mogthul succeeded in freeing it fully? He shook his head. Even the mountains might have trembled for leagues. Arondir shivered. Then the seal must hold. It will, Gandalf replied, though a shadow passed through his eyes. For a time. They climbed steadily until at last the faint scent of fresh air reached them. Turning a final corner, they emerged into the lightless entrance hall, where the great stone doors still hung ajar. Beyond lay the frigid plateau, washed in pale afternoon light. The world outside felt strangely quiet after the chaos below. Gandalf stepped onto the snow-crusted ground and drew in a deep breath of cold, clean air. The sky above was streaked with thin clouds, and the wind whispered softly along the ridge. Arondir helped guide Mogthul into the open, binding him to a jutting rock while they caught their breath. The orc did not resist. He stared numbly toward the horizon, his thoughts lost. Gandalf surveyed the land. The trolls will not linger now. Their allegiance was to Mogthul's promise, not his person, and with the stone gone from his hand, that promise lies shattered. Arondir nodded. What of the scattered tribes? Will they rally again? Not soon, Gandalf answered. The stone was the bond that drew them. Without it, fear and mistrust will scatter them as leaves before the wind. He paused. But the memory of its power will remain. Others may seek it, if whispers of its existence spread. Arondir looked troubled. Then we must see that such whispers die. Gandalf smiled faintly. Indeed. They rested only briefly. The sun was beginning its descent, and night in the northern heights was no friend to travelers, especially wounded ones. Gandalf and Arondir secured Mogthul between them, for the orc's legs were still unsteady, and set off down the ravine they had come by. The silence of the mountains was deep, broken only by the crunch of snow beneath their boots and Mogthul's labored breathing. Though the wind carried no scent of pursuit, Gandalf remained vigilant. The memory of the stone's cold pulse lingered inside him, like a frost that would not thaw. After a time, Arondir asked quietly, "Do you think the spirit will remain bound? Truly?" Gandalf walked for several paces before answering. The dwarves who crafted the seal understood the threat well. Their work is strong, yet no binding is eternal. Should the mountain shake with great force, or if some fool attempts to tamper with the seal, his staff tapped the snow, then yes, it could break. Arondir's jaw tightened. Then let none approach Nargzigil again. That, Gandalf said, may be beyond our power to ensure, but we can see that its tale is kept only by those with wisdom to guard it. They continued down the ridge, the wind rising behind them. As they walked, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the snow. The road would be long, and the burden heavier than Gandalf wished, but he bore it with steady purpose. For though the spirit was sealed and Mogthul captured, the stone's memory lingered within him. There had been a force in it, a will, that he had not fully recognized. And deep within that will he had sensed something stirring, faint, yet familiar. A whisper, like the distant echo of a shadow he had not faced in long years. A reminder that the darkness gathering in Middle-earth did not sleep. And Gandalf knew, as he led his companions down the mountain, that this burden would not be lifted from his heart for a long time yet. Night had nearly fallen by the time Gandalf, Arondir, and their captive reached the lower foothills of the Grey Mountains. Though the wind still carried winter's bite, the land here was kinder, scattered with hardy shrubs and patches of frost-brittle grass that whispered beneath their boots. Mogthul shuffled between them, like a man walking in a dream, his eyes dull, his steps dragged, as though the stone's loss had hollowed him from within. "We will reach the ranger camp by moonrise," Arondir said, glancing toward the deepening sky. "My kin keep a watch in the vales north of Mirkwood. They will take the orc into custody and see to your wounds." Gandalf gave a faint smile. "My wounds are not so grave as yours, my friend." Arondir chuckled softly, though he winced as he shifted his arm. "Perhaps, but yours are older, and those are harder to mend." They pressed onward until the ravine widened into a shallow basin, sheltered by craggy outcrops. Thin clouds drifted overhead, veiling the stars. Gandalf paused. Something in the air had changed, subtle but unmistakable. He lifted his staff, its glow dim but steady. "Stop," he murmured. Arondir halted at once. Mogthul slumped to the ground, exhausted, groaning faintly as the cold touched him. The ranger drew his sword and scanned the rocks. "What is it?" Gandalf listened. The wind hushed. The breath of the land seemed to draw inward. No birds stirred. No night insects hummed. The world held its tongue. Then he heard it. A faint scrape of stone on stone, as though something large shifted nearby. "Orcs?" Arondir whispered. "No." Gandalf shook his head. "Whatever lurks, it moves with far too much care for orcs, and too much weight." A shadow passed across the ridge. A deep grunt rumbled from the darkness, low, coarse, unmistakably hostile. "Trolls," Gandalf whispered. "At least two." Mogthul flinched where he sat. They followed me," he muttered. "Swore loyalty, but without the stone." Another grunt answered him. "They smell blood," Arondir said. "They smell weakness," Gandalf corrected grimly. He guided Arondir behind a boulder and hauled Mogthul upright. The orc stumbled, barely conscious. "Stay quiet," Gandalf murmured. "If they recognize you, their wrath will be doubled." A massive shape lumbered into view atop the ridge, a troll near twice the height of a man, its skin the color of old lichen, its eyes burning like embers. It sniffed the air loudly, nostrils flaring. A second shape followed, slightly smaller but no less dangerous. They had the advantage of height. One wrong sound would draw them down like wolves on prey. Arondir whispered, "If they attack, we cannot outrun them." "No," Gandalf agreed, "but we may outwit them." The trolls sniffed again, confused by the mingled sense of man, wizard, and orc. Then the nearest one growled, "Mogthul! Mogthul, come! Stone Master!" Arondir's hand tightened on his sword hilt. Gandalf's eyes narrowed. "Stone Master gone," croaked the second troll. "No firelight now, no call, no strength." The first troll beat its chest with a thunderous thud. "Then Mogthul useless. Trolls take what they want." Gandalf saw the creatures tense, their massive hands curling, their bodies leaning forward. "Now," he whispered. As the trolls leapt down the slope, Gandalf struck his staff against the ground. A blinding white flash burst forth, carving the darkness in two. The light struck the trolls full in the face. They roared, clutching their eyes, stumbling wildly. "Arondir, move!" The ranger dashed forward, dragging Mogthul toward the narrow cleft between two boulders. Gandalf followed, weaving spells of light that burst like falling stars, keeping the trolls disoriented. But trolls recover quickly, and these were mountain-bred, stronger and crueler than their kin who roamed the wilds between the misty mountains and the hills of Ettenmoors. The larger of the two shook its head violently and blinked through the fading light. "Wizard," it snarled. "Break him!" Gandalf raised his staff again, but the troll barreled forward with terrifying speed. Its fist slammed into the earth where Gandalf had stood only a heartbeat earlier, scattering shards of rock. Arondir pulled Mogthul deeper into the cleft, then turned back, sword drawn. "Gandalf! This way!" The wizard backed into the passage, staff raised high. The trolls roared and charged, but the cleft's walls narrowed swiftly, forcing them to squeeze sideways. Their advantage of size turned into a hindrance. Still, their long arms clawed at the stone, tearing chunks free. One massive hand groped blindly toward Arondir, who slashed at it with his blade. The troll bellowed in pain. "Keep moving," Gandalf urged. "The passage widens ahead. We must reach the next ridge." They pushed forward, Mogthul stumbling between them, his breath rasping. Behind them, the trolls forced their way into the cleft, cracking stone, their fury echoing like thunder. At last the passage opened onto a narrow ledge overlooking a deep ravine. Moonlight spilled across the rocks, revealing the thin, treacherous path along the cliff's edge. One misstep would be fatal. But there was no turning back. Arondir grimaced. "We cannot stay here." "No," Gandalf agreed, "but the ravine may yet save us." He lifted his staff and murmured words of shaping and sound. The rocks beneath the cleft shivered, then split with a grinding crack. A shower of dust rained down. The trolls halted, confused, just as the ledge behind them gave way entirely. With a deafening roar, both monsters toppled backward into the darkness, their bellows fading as they crashed upon the stones far below. Silence followed, broken only by their fading groans. Arondir lowered his sword and exhaled shakily. That was too close. Far too close, Gandalf agreed. These mountains hold more dangers than orcs and relics. He turned to Mogthul, who had slumped against the cliff wall. The orc's breathing was shallow, his stare vacant. Gandalf bent beside him. "Do you see now?" the wizard said softly. "The stone gave you power only by feeding on the fear and greed of others. Without it, there is nothing left but the ruin of your own making." Mogthul blinked slowly. "No. Purpose," he murmured. "No tribe, no voice. Empty." Gandalf's expression was grave. "Not empty, merely without chains. You may yet choose what remains of your path." Arondir frowned. "You speak as though he could change." Gandalf rose. "Change comes rarely to orcs, but not never." They rested only briefly before continuing along the ledge, seeking safer ground. The moon climbed higher, silvering the rocks as the gray mountains receded behind them. Yet Gandalf could not shake the weight that pressed upon him, a heaviness that had settled deep within since the moment he first sensed the stone below Narag-Zegal. Not fear, not doubt. Something deeper, older, colder. A warning. For though the spirit had been bound and the relic sealed, a shadow had brushed his thoughts. Faint, but familiar. A whisper he hoped never to hear again. And as the night deepened around them, Gandalf the Grey walked with a new and unspoken burden, knowing the long road ahead held darker turns yet unseen. Midnight draped its mantle across the land as Gandalf, Arondir, and Mogthul descended into the sheltered valleys south of the Grey Mountains. The sharp winds of the heights had faded, replaced by quieter breezes that drifted among the pine forests. The moon gleamed faintly through drifting cloud, lending the woods a pale, dreamlike glow. Yet Gandalf felt no peace. His thoughts stirred like dark water, unsettled by the memory of the stone's terrible pulse. Arondir walked ahead, scouting the dim trail. Behind him, Mogthul trudged silently, every step heavy. The orc's strength, once bolstered by fearsome pride, now seemed stripped to its barest threads, he followed without resistance, perhaps because there was nowhere left to flee, perhaps because his will had been broken with the loss of the stone. Gandalf watched him carefully. "You walk without chains," the wizard said, "yet you do not try to run." Mugthul grunted, his voice low and rough. "Run where? Trolls would tear me. Orcs would mock me. Men would kill me. What use in running? You may find more paths than you think," Gandalf replied, though his tone held no promise, only observation. Mugthul's jaw tightened. "No path for an orc." Gandalf did not answer. Some truths could not be softened. As they continued, the forest thickened. Pines rose tall around them, their trunks black against the moonlit sky. The scent of sap and damp earth filled the air. Somewhere in the distance an owl hooted, and the rustling of small creatures stirred in the underbrush. Yet underneath these familiar sounds lingered a tension, like a string drawn taut. Arondir paused and raised a hand. "Something is near." Gandalf lifted his staff slightly, letting its faint glow illuminate the roots and rocks around them. "How many?" "Not orcs," Arondir whispered. "The sound is too light." A twig snapped to their left. A shadow flickered among the trees. Then another. Mugthul hissed sharply, shrinking back. "Rangers!" he spat. Arondir narrowed his eyes. "No, my kin would not stalk us so openly." A figure stepped into the moonlight. Then a second, then a third. Gandalf's breath eased with relief. "Elves," he said softly. From among the trees emerged a small company of woodland elves, clad in cloaks the color of moss and moon shadow. Their bows were drawn, though not aimed, and their eyes glimmered with caution. At their head stood an elf with silver hair braided neatly down his back, his posture both graceful and vigilant. "May Gavanen, Mithrandir," the elf said, placing a hand to his chest. "Your presence here is no small surprise." Gandalf inclined his head. "And yours, Belthrian, is most welcome, for the night has been long." Arondir relaxed his stance. Mugthul shrank further into his cloak, wary of the elf's gaze. Belthrian's eyes shifted from ranger to orc, lingering on Mugthul with cold measure. "You bring grim company." "He is our prisoner," Arondir said, "and his capture is tied to darker matters than mere raids." Gandalf gestured for calm. "This orc led a band seeking to rouse ancient powers. The threat has been dealt with, for now, but the burden of such deeds lingers." Belthrian studied Mugthul. "There is deceit in him." "There is defeat in him," Gandalf corrected gently. "A difference worth noting, though both are dangerous." Mugthul glared but said nothing. His shoulders hunched as though he wished to become invisible. One of the elves stepped forward, bow half raised. "Shall we bind him?" "No," Gandalf said. "He will not flee, and if he does, you will not need rope to stop him." Belthrian nodded. "Very well, but we should not remain exposed. Orcs have wandered farther south of late. Let us retreat to safer ground." With silent grace, the elves guided them through the forest, moving swiftly but without sound. They came upon a sheltered glade, where moonlight filtered down in thin shafts between the branches. A small fire was lit, not of open flame, but of glowing embers, giving enough warmth without betraying their presence to distant eyes. Mugthul was seated at the edge of the circle, guarded by two elves whose arrows never dipped. Arondir cleaned his blade and wrapped cloth around his bruised arm. Gandalf settled beside the fire, staring into the amber glow. Belthrian took a place beside him. "You look troubled, old friend." Gandalf sighed. "Troubled?" "Yes. The relic we encountered, the stone of Narag Zegal, it was not crafted by dwarves. yet it lay in their keeping. Belthrien's gaze sharpened. Then who shaped it? A question I cannot yet answer, Gandalf murmured, but its presence, its whisper, it echoed of darkness that should have perished long ago. Belthrien considered him with quiet understanding. Does it concern the shadow returning in the south? Gandalf looked up. The firelight flickered in his eyes. I fear that all shadows may be threads of one greater weave, he said, and this stone was a knot in that pattern. The elf frowned. Then why seal it rather than destroy it? Because destruction might have shattered more than the stone, Gandalf said gravely. The spirit bound to it was ancient, cunning. To break its vessel might have freed it. Sealing was our only choice. Belthrien nodded slowly. And yet you carry its memory heavily. Yes, Gandalf whispered. Heavily indeed. The forest rustled softly around them. The fire's quiet glow flickered across the glade. For a moment, the weight upon Gandalf seemed carved into his face. Lines of worry, of foresight, of unspoken dread. Belthrien watched him with the calm patience of his kind, understanding that even a wizard may bear wounds unseen. At last, Arondir approached, bowing slightly to Belthrien. We thank you for your aid, but our path leads south. We must bring Mogthul to my kin. Your journey will be safer with us, Belthrien said. The night still holds dangers. Gandalf rose slowly, leaning upon his staff. We should accept his offer. The mountains may yet stir, not with spirits or trolls, but with fugitives seeking vengeance or relics they can no longer claim. Mogthul looked up sharply, but said nothing. The elves extinguished their ember fire and formed a silent escort. Under moon and bough, the company moved like a drifting shadow, their steps swift and sure. Gandalf walked with measured pace, the unease still lingering in his heart. And as they passed deeper into the woodland paths, he could not keep from glancing northward, toward the mountains now hidden by darkness. Something in those heights had touched him. Something ancient. Something waiting. The burden, though unspoken, grew no lighter, and the road ahead promised no ease. Dawn came quietly, as though unwilling to disturb the solemn company moving southward beneath the trees. The pale light filtered through the canopy, turning the leaves to muted gold and silver. The air smelled of moss and early frost, and the only sound was the soft tread of elven boots upon the forest floor. Gandalf walked near the center of the column, his staff tapping lightly as he guided Mogthul forward. The orc moved stiffly, but he no longer resisted or muttered. His strength had withered into a dull, lingering endurance. Belthrien led the way with unerring certainty, every step sure despite the tangled roots and uneven ground. Arondir followed close behind him, though Gandalf observed the ranger's weariness. He had endured chains, battle, and a mountain's wrath, yet he pressed on with the quiet resolve of his people. At last the trees thinned, and the company emerged upon a gentle rise overlooking a valley touched by the rising sun. Slopes of golden grass rolled down toward a stream that wound like a thin silver snake between distant hills. Smoke rose faintly from a copse of trees farther south. Arondir shaded his eyes. There. My kin keep watch in the grove. They will see us safely from here. Belthrien nodded. We shall escort you until the boundary. Our patrol turns east beyond that point. The elves guided them down the hill, moving with both grace and caution. Though the valley seemed quiet, Gandalf sensed unease still rippling through the land, subtle but definite. The mountains behind them remained hidden by the trees, yet their dark memory clung like a shadow stretching far beyond stone. As they neared the stream, one of the elves raised a hand. Movement! A pair of figures emerged from the grove, Dunedain, clad in gray cloaks, bows drawn. When they recognized Arendir, they hurried forward with relief and astonishment. By the stars, we feared you lost, one of them breathed. What befell you in the north? That, Gandalf said gently, is a tale best told by a fire when the day grows quiet. For now, we bring you both warning and a prisoner. The ranger's expressions hardened at the sight of Mogthul. They seized him at once, binding him with practiced skill. The orc no longer protested. He simply bowed his head as though the weight of the world pressed upon him. Arendir clasped forearms with his kinsman. He must be watched closely, but he is broken. The true danger lies not in him, but in what he sought. Gandalf stepped forward, his tone somber. Listen well. Deep in the northern mines lies a relic of dark intent. It has been sealed, but not destroyed. Few must know of it. Fewer still must seek it. Its whisper is subtle, and those with weak hearts may yet be drawn to its promise. One ranger frowned. Then we should send word south, to your order, Gandalf. Let them judge what is to be done. I shall send word, Gandalf replied. In time. But let not this tale spread openly. Secrets of such dread have a way of gathering ears. Belthrian approached and placed a hand on Gandalf's shoulder. Our paths part here, yet know this. If ever you call upon our company again, Mithrandir, we shall come. Gandalf smiled faintly. You have my thanks, Belthrian. May the stars shine upon your patrol. And upon your road, the elf replied. With a final bow, the elves slipped into the forest, like mist caught by wind, their forms vanishing silently among the trees. The glade seemed dimmer for their passing. Gandalf watched them go. Only when the last whisper of their movement faded did he turn back to the rangers. We must find shelter, one ranger said. You all need rest. Arendir nodded. There is a hunt lodge half a league south. Its roof still holds, and its hearth is good. Together they led Mogthul across the stream and followed a narrow trail through tall grass. The sun climbed steadily, warming the earth and casting long shadows that swayed with the breeze. Gandalf walked in silence for a time, his mind wandering back to Narag-Zigil. The dim corridors, the trembling earth, the echoing cries of the spirit, all lingered in his thoughts. He felt again the cold breath of that ancient force against his face, the promise of malice without flesh or form. It had known him, not in name perhaps, but in essence. It had recoiled from his light with something like recognition. That troubled him more than all the rest. Arendir fell back beside him. The burden still weighs upon you. Gandalf gave a faint smile. You see clearly. The ranger shrugged. Hard to miss. You look as though you carry a stone heavier than any born in Narag-Zigil. In truth, Gandalf murmured, I fear the stone was not its own master. Something stirred it, something far away, yet reaching. Arendir frowned. A greater darkness? Yes, Gandalf said softly. A shadow stretching across lands that do not yet know it. I had hoped the world would have more time before such whispers grew bold again. They walked on. The sun rose further, warming the earth. Yet Gandalf felt no warmth in his heart. When they reached the hunt lodge, a sturdy timber structure nestled against a rocky rise, the rangers quickly secured Mogthul to a pillar. They kindled a small fire in the hearth and heated water for tending wounds. Arendir sat heavily on a bench. One ranger cleaned the cuts on his arm, while the other prepared food. Gandalf stood by the window, staring out at the distant mountains. Their peaks were far now, but the memory of their deep halls tugged at him like a whispering wind. At length, Arendir spoke. "You look as though you listen for something." "I do," Gandalf replied, "but I pray I hear nothing." The ranger hesitated. "Will the spirit remain bound?" "For a time," Gandalf said. "But such bindings are old, and the world changes. Pressure shifts, shadows wander, and if the seal is tested again..." His words faded into silence. Arendir bowed his head. "Then we must stand vigilant." "Yes," Gandalf said quietly. "Vigilance is our only shield." From the far side of the room, Mogthul spoke, his voice ragged. "It will call again." The rangers stiffened. Gandalf turned. Mogthul lifted his head, revealing eyes shadowed by exhaustion, yet haunted by something deeper. Stone Master, spirit, darkness, all the same, it whispers still. "Not to you," Gandalf said. "Not now," the orc agreed, "but it will. To others, to tribes, to creatures hungry for power." Gandalf approached him, staff in hand. "Do you regret your choice, Mogthul?" The orc laughed bitterly. "Regret? Orcs do not regret, but I fear." The lodge grew quiet. Even the fire crackled softly as though listening. Gandalf placed a hand on Mogthul's shoulder, not gently, but firmly. "Fear may yet be the one thing that keeps you from doom." Mogthul said nothing more. He slumped against the pillar, exhausted. Gandalf stepped back and let out a long breath. "Rest now," he told the rangers. "We shall continue our journey south on the morrow. There is still far to go." As the fire burned low and shadows stretched across the lodge, the wizard seated himself in silence, gazing into the flames. Though the night beyond was calm, Gandalf felt the weight of unseen eyes watching from far away. Eyes kindled by ancient malice, stirring ever so slowly. And he knew the unlifted burden upon him would not lessen with dawn. Morning broke pale and thin across the lodge, the sunlight creeping reluctantly over the timbered roof as though wary of stepping inside. Gandalf was already awake, seated near the dying embers. He had slept little, though the others rested soundly enough. For a wizard's thoughts could not be quieted so easily, not when shadows stirred in hidden places. Arendir rose with a groan, rubbing stiffness from his limbs. The rangers who had joined them before dawn moved with brisk discipline, checking bows, tightening cloak straps, and preparing Mogthul for travel. The orc sat slumped, his wrists bound, his face ashen. He lifted his gaze only once when Gandalf stood. "You lead me south," Mogthul muttered, "to judgment." "Perhaps," Gandalf said, "but judgment is not always the end of a path." Mogthul snorted. "For an orc it is." Arendir approached Gandalf as the company made ready. "If we keep a steady pace, we will reach the old watchtower by nightfall. My kin guard that place well. Mogthul will be secure there." "Good," Gandalf said, though his tone carried heaviness. "Yet be wary. Orcs may stray far from their dens, and rumor travels quicker than wind." They left the lodge behind, crossing southward through rolling hills brushed with morning mist. Pines thinned gradually, giving way to low heather and scrub. The air warmed as they descended from the northern heights, but Gandalf felt no ease in the change. Something in the wind still carried the echo of deep places, echoes only he could sense. Mogthul walked between two rangers, though he did not resist. His shoulders sagged as if carrying an invisible burden. Gandalf watched him from time to time, wondering what thoughts churned behind the orc's sunken eyes. Remorse, fear, or simply the emptiness left when an unnatural power was stripped away. Around midday, they reached a small ridge overlooking a wide stretch of open land. Far off, A cluster of birch trees whispered in the wind, and the glint of a river wound like a bright thread through the fields. Arondir halted. "We should eat before crossing the flats. There is little cover beyond this point." The company settled beneath the shade of a lone fir tree. Gandalf accepted a share of bread and dried berries, though his mind was elsewhere. The memory of the stone stirred within him, cold and distant, like a remnant of frost clinging to the heart. He closed his eyes for a moment, but the peace did not last. A sharp whistle cut across the hollow, one of the ranger's signals. Another ranger rose swiftly. "Movement in the fields." Gandalf stood at once, staff in hand. "How many?" "Hard to say," the scout answered, crouching at the crest of the ridge. "Shapes in the grass, low, swift." Arondir joined him, peering into the fields. "Wargs," he said grimly. "A pack, hunting." Mogthul stiffened. A flicker of ancient instinct lit his eyes. "They come for me." "No," Gandalf murmured. "They come for whatever they can eat, but your scent may certainly spur them on." The rangers formed a defensive arc, bows drawn. The grass rippled in strange patterns, far too deliberate for mere wind. Shadows darted between the blades. Then a low growl rolled across the land. The first warg burst from the grass, its fur dark and matted, its eyes burning with wild hunger. More followed, 6, then 8, then a full dozen, bounding forward in swift, powerful leaps. "Hold fast," Arondir commanded. Arrows flew, striking 2 wargs before they reached the slope. But the beasts were swift. They darted aside, howling in fury. The pack surged toward the ridge. Gandalf raised his staff. Light flared at the tip, brilliant as a morning star, and swept outward in a wide arc. The nearest wargs recoiled, snarling, but others circled to flank the rangers. Teeth flashed, claws scraped stone. One warg lunged directly at Mogthul. The orc stumbled back in terror, struggling against his bonds. 2 rangers intercepted the beast, spears thrusting. The warg shrieked and fell, but another leaped over its body, jaws snapping for Mogthul's throat. Gandalf struck the ground with his staff. A shock of white fire rippled outward, knocking the warg aside. It tumbled down the ridge, yelping. "Stay close," the wizard cried. Arondir and the rangers fought fiercely, blades gleaming as they drove back the pack. Yet the wargs were relentless. They attacked with a ferocity born of hunger and malice, refusing to break. A large warg, a great black brute, taller than the rest, emerged from the grass with a guttural roar. Scars crisscrossed its muzzle, and one eye glowed with a sickly yellow gleam. It fixed its gaze on Gandalf. "Stand back," Arondir warned, raising his sword. But the warg charged with terrifying speed. Before Arondir could meet its blow, Mogthul lunged. The orc hurled himself forward, slamming shoulder first into the massive beast. Both tumbled across the ridge in a snarling heap. Mogthul, still bound hand and foot, used his weight and strength to pin the warg's jaws aside for a heartbeat. It was enough. Arondir leaped in, driving his blade deep into the warg's flank. The beast convulsed and fell still. For a moment, all sound faded except Mogthul's ragged breathing. The remaining wargs hesitated. Then, with frustrated growls, they fled back into the tall grass, vanishing as swiftly as they'd come. Silence settled over the ridge. Arondir turned to Mogthul, stunned. "You saved my life." Mogthul spat blood and struggled to sit upright. "Warg wanted me first," he muttered. "Better to fall fighting than be eaten like a rabbit." Gandalf approached him slowly. "Yet you threw yourself between him and me." Mogthul looked away. "Stonemaster or no, I did not wish to die there." Gandalf met Arondir's gaze. The ranger saw the same thing he did, that something in Mogthul had cracked, not broken entirely, but shifted, revealing a glimmer of something unexpected. Not goodness, not redemption, but choice. They bound Mogthul's wounds and tightened his restraints. The company ate in uneasy quiet before setting out once more. Afternoon waned. By the time they reached the watchtower, an ancient stone structure standing alone on a ridge, the sun hung low in the sky. Dunedain sentries welcomed them with cautious relief. Mogthul was taken to a guarded chamber. The rangers tended the wounded, prepared food, and shared tidings from the south. Gandalf withdrew to the tower's upper level as twilight deepened. The land spread before him in shades of gold and violet. Cool air brushed his face, yet the peace could not loosen the knot within him. Arondir joined him on the parapet. "You saved us today," he said. "Without you, and without Mogthul, we might have fallen." "Even the darkest hearts may surprise us," Gandalf said, "but it does not change the road ahead." "You fear what lies beyond Narag-Zigil?" "Yes," Gandalf answered softly, "for it was not the stone alone that stirred. Something else reached for it, something that knows patience and hunger." He gripped the stone edge of the parapet. "The burden remains with me," he murmured, "and I must carry it, though the road grows darker." Below them, the watchtower torches flickered. Crickets sang in the fields. The night gathered gently around the land. But Gandalf could not shake the feeling that somewhere far away, a shadow shifted, stirring faintly, waiting for its moment. The burden would not be lifted. Not yet. Night settled thick and deep over the old watchtower, its stones whispering with the memory of long-forgotten wars. Though the fires below burned steady, Gandalf lingered on the parapet long after the rangers retired to their rest. The stars above gleamed cold and distant, bright as scattered gems strewn across a velvet sky. Yet even their light brought him no ease, for the weight of the north pressed heavily upon his thoughts. He leaned upon his staff and watched the wind ripple across the grasslands, stirring faint waves through the silvered fields. Somewhere far off, a wolf howled, its lonely cry carried on the breeze. The sound might have unnerved a lesser traveler, but Gandalf only sighed, listening. It was the voice of nature, untainted by shadow, one of the few pure things left in the world. Footsteps approached, light but deliberate. Arondir emerged from the stairway, cloak wrapped tightly around his shoulders. The ranger's face still bore the strain of their ordeal, but he moved with steady purpose. "You should sleep," Arondir said gently. "You have carried the heavier share of this journey." Gandalf smiled faintly. "Rest will not quiet the mind tonight. There is too much stirring in the dark." Arondir joined him at the parapet. "Is it the spirit you fear still lingers?" "The spirit is sealed," Gandalf replied. "At least for now. But the stone's power, it called not merely to Mogthul. It reached through him. Something sought it, something that did not belong to the halls of dwarves or the tribes of orcs. That is what troubles me." Arondir shivered despite the still air. "Do you believe this unseen will grow stronger?" "It has grown bolder," Gandalf answered, "and boldness is the herald of strength." Below them, a ranger's voice called the changing of the watch. Torches shifted. Shadows moved in slow patterns. Mogthul was locked deep within the tower's lowest chamber, bound by heavy iron and kept under vigilant eyes. Yet Gandalf found little comfort in that. "Mogthul," Arondir said after a time, "surprised us today. I would not have thought an orc capable of such a choice." "Nor did he," Gandalf replied. "But even creatures shaped by darkness may still recoil from a fate worse than death. And in such moments, a sliver of something unexpected may appear." Arondir glanced toward the chamber where Mogthul was held. What will become of him? That is not for us to decide, Gandalf said. But perhaps his tale ends differently than he imagined. The ranger nodded thoughtfully, but before he could speak again, a soft tapping echoed up the stairwell. One of the younger rangers appeared, bow slung across his back. "Masters," he said, bowing. "There is movement on the plains, shapes in the moonlight." Arondir stiffened. "More wargs?" "I do not think so," the ranger said. "They move upright, swiftly, silent as shadows." Gandalf's expression darkened. "Show us." They followed the young ranger down to the tower's outer courtyard, where two more stood ready with torches. One pointed toward the northern flats, his face pale. "There," he whispered. "See how they linger just beyond the torch glow?" Gandalf stepped forward, narrowing his eyes. For a moment, he saw nothing but shifting moonlight. Then, movement. Figures, tall and lean, drifting among the grasses like phantoms. They did not approach. They did not call. They only watched. "How many?" Arondir murmured. "Perhaps 6, said the ranger. "Perhaps more." Mogthul, from his chamber below, let out a hoarse growl. "They come for me," he rasped. "Not wargs, not orcs, hunters." "Hunters?" Arondir frowned. "What kind?" Mogthul's voice trembled. "Those who followed the stone's call. Not orcs, not beasts. Those who walk in shadow. Those who serve what sleeps beneath mountains." Gandalf's grip tightened on his staff. "Open the lower chamber. Bring him here." The rangers obeyed quickly. Mogthul was dragged into the courtyard, though he made no attempt to resist. His eyes fixed on the distant shapes. Fear, raw and primal, gleamed in them. "What follows you?" Gandalf asked quietly. "Speak." "Devotees," Mogthul gasped. "From the old tribes. They worshipped the stone in secret long before I took it. They sought its awakening. They believed it would grant dominion and vengeance. When I claimed it, they swore to kill any who stood between them and its power." Arondir exchanged a grim look with Gandalf. "If they think the stone is still with him." "They will come," Mogthul whispered, "to free me or to tear me apart. Their loyalty is to the relic alone." The distant shapes shifted. One raised an arm, and a long, keening cry split the night. Not a howl, not a shout, something sharper, wilder, unsettling. The rangers stepped back, gripping their weapons. Gandalf lifted his staff. "Seal the gates, bar the windows, prepare bows. They will not assault us in daylight, but night is their ally." The watchtower sprang to life. Torches flared. Spears and bows were set in order. The rangers moved with the swift coordination of seasoned warriors, forming defensive lines near the courtyard wall. But the shadow shapes did not charge. They remained just beyond the torchlight, gliding in a loose circle. Arondir drew close to Gandalf. "What are they waiting for?" "Patience," Gandalf murmured. "A weapon sharper than any blade. They will test our defenses until they find a weakness." Mogthul trembled. "Do not let them take me." "Be silent," a ranger hissed, but Gandalf raised a hand. "He speaks truth, for if they take him, they will learn the fate of the stone, and they will not cease until they find Narag-Zigil." The tension in the air thickened. The night pulsed with quiet menace. Gandalf walked to the gate and struck his staff against the earth. Light rippled outward, but the shapes faded further into the grass, as though melting into the shadows. "They cannot be driven off by light alone," Gandalf said. "Their will is anchored to the relic, though they know not where it lies now." Arondir's face hardened. "Then we must endure until dawn." "Yes," Gandalf replied, "but dawn is many hours away." The watchers encircled the tower, drifting closer whenever the torches dimmed. Their eyes gleamed faintly, gold, red, or pale as moonlit ice, no two alike, as though each bore the mark of different lands, different tribes, bound only by devotion to a power they scarcely understood. From time to time they uttered strange chants, soft, rhythmic, carrying an edge of madness. The sound coiled through the night like smoke. Inside the tower, rangers sat poised with drawn bows. Mogthul huddled in a corner, muttering broken words, haunted by memories of rituals and shadows best forgotten. Gandalf stood upon the parapet, watching the plains with unwavering gaze. "They seek the stone," he whispered, "and they will not cease." Arondir joined him. "If dawn comes, and they remain, then we must face them beyond these walls," Gandalf said, "for this tower cannot withstand a siege of unseen hands." Below, the watchers shifted again, slowly closing the circle. The night grew colder. The wind grew still. And Gandalf understood that the burden he bore, the unlifted burden, had drawn darker eyes than he had feared. The shadow was reaching, and its fingers were already brushing the world. The night pressed harder against the watchtower as though the darkness itself sought entry. The strange figures that circled the plains drew ever nearer, drifting like smoke on the wind. Their forms were half seen, sometimes tall and gaunt, sometimes hunched as beasts, yet always silent, save for their eerie, murmured chants. Within the tower walls, the rangers kept their bows drawn, their faces set in grim concentration. The torches burned low, casting long, trembling shadows over the stone floor. Gandalf stood at the highest window, watching the plains with unwavering attention. Arondir joined him, cloak tight around his shoulders. "They do not attack," he whispered, "yet they will not depart. They wait for fear to do its work," Gandalf replied. "Such servants are patient. Their devotion is not to Mogthul, nor to any mortal leader. They follow the relic's memory. Its call has shaped them." Arondir's hand brushed unconsciously against the hilt of his sword. "What manner of men, or orcs, are they?" "Neither," Gandalf said. "Once perhaps they were of mortal stock, tribes scattered in the wreckage of the old wars. But those who give themselves wholly to shadows are changed, bound by a will no longer their own." Arondir's gaze darkened. "If they seek the stone, they will not relent." "No," Gandalf murmured. "They will not." Below them, a sudden howl rose from the plains, sharp, unnatural. The rangers stiffened. Mogthul, in his guarded corner, curled tighter into himself. "Wizard," he rasped, voice trembling. "They will break in. They always find a way." Gandalf turned toward him. "Not while I keep watch." But even as he spoke, the watchers on the plains shifted again. Several crouched low, hands sweeping over the grass as though sensing unseen currents beneath the earth. Then, rising in unison, they pointed toward the tower and uttered a shrill cry like the ringing of glass. A blast of wind struck the walls, cold enough to bite the skin, sharp enough to snuff half the torches in an instant. The rangers staggered. One cried, "What sorcery is this?" Gandalf seized his staff, its tip blazing with white fire. "Hold your ground. They cannot cross the threshold while my light remains." He descended swiftly to the courtyard, where the remaining torches guttered in the sudden gale. Arondir followed, hand on his sword. Mogthul was dragged forward by two rangers who dared not leave him alone. Gandalf raised his staff. A sphere of light burst outward, anchoring itself above the gate like a suspended star. The cold wind faltered, but the shadow shapes did not retreat. They advanced, slowly, steadily, as though drawn by a force beyond fear. The first of them stepped into the edge of the torch glow. He, or it, wore a ragged cloak that fluttered like torn wings. No face was visible beneath the hood, only a faint glimmer of dim red light where eyes should be. Another figure followed, and another. Soon a half-ring of wandering forms crept toward the gate, their movements unnatural, their limbs bending with the wrongness of those long stripped of ordinary flesh. A ranger whispered, "Spirits?" "No," Gandalf said sternly. "Not spirits. Mortals twisted by the shadow they sought to serve." Mogthul moaned softly. "They will kill me, to reclaim the stone's will." Arendir's jaw hardened. "They will not have you." The watchers halted just beyond the ring of white light. For a long moment, the only sound was the harsh wind and the crackle of dying torches. Then, all at once, the central figure reached into its cloak and withdrew an object, a shard of stone, jagged as broken bone. Gandalf's eyes widened. "A fragment," he whispered. "A piece of a binding stone, perhaps. It may carry some faint echo of the relic's call." The figure raised it high. A low hum vibrated through the courtyard stones. The air tightened around the watchtower, humming like a bowstring drawn to breaking. The light above the gate flickered. Gandalf struck his staff against the earth. The trembling ceased, for a heartbeat. Then another figure produced another shard, and another. From cloaks and belts, they drew the broken remnants of crude stones, each humming with pale malice. Together the fragments joined in a chorus that strained against Gandalf's light. The gate's arch groaned. Dust sifted from the stones. Arondir shouted, "Gandalf!" "I hear it," Gandalf said, eyes narrowing. This tower was not built to withstand such sorcery. He planted his staff firmly and began to speak words that trembled with ancient authority, words of warding and unmaking. The white sphere blazed brighter. The watchers recoiled, but did not flee. Their chant rose higher, sharp as blades scraping stone. The tower shuddered. A crack rippled through the parapet. Rangers scrambled back. Mogthul cowered, hands over his ears. "They will tear the tower apart." Gandalf felt sweat bead on his brow. "They do not need to breach the stone. They seek only one weakness, one crack in the ward." Then, from the shadows beyond the ring of figures, a new shape emerged. Taller, straighter, moving with a terrible calm. A hooded form approached, but unlike the others, it bore no stone fragment. Instead, it carried a staff, twisted wood, blackened by age, capped with a flicker of blue fire. Arondir tensed. "A sorcerer. A servant of the relic," Gandalf said grimly. "Its chosen voice." The figure halted, lifting its head slightly as though scenting the air. Then it spoke, not in orc tongue, not in the common speech, but in a whispering language that crawled like ice across the skin. Gandalf's heart tightened. A tongue from the Elder Dark. The watchers echoed its words. Their chant swelled. The shards shimmered with cruel light. The tower rang like a struck bell. Arondir staggered. "We cannot endure this." Gandalf stepped forward. "No, we must break their circle." "How?" Arondir demanded. "By severing the staff of their leader," Mogthul cried out. "You will be slain." "Not tonight," Gandalf said softly. He strode toward the gate. Arondir grabbed his shoulder. "You cannot face that alone." "I must," Gandalf answered, "for only my light can challenge his shadow." The rangers exchanged troubled glances, but none stepped in his way. Gandalf passed beneath the sphere of light. The watchers hissed, shrinking back. The leader raised his twisted staff. Blue fire flared. Gandalf raised his own. White fire blazed. The two lights met in a clash that shook the plains, sending wind howling in all directions. Grass flattened. Stones trembled. The watchers wailed. their chant fracturing. The crack in the tower sealed itself with a groan. Gandalf pressed forward, staff blazing brighter. "Begone!" he thundered, voice echoing across the land. "Your master's will cannot reach you here." The leader staggered. Cracks of light snaked across his staff. He shrieked, not with a mortal voice, but with a sound like a tearing veil. Then, the staff shattered. The watchers collapsed, shrieking as though struck by invisible blows. Their fragments fell from limp hands, their forms dissolved into shivering shadows that fled across the plains without shape or direction. When silence fell at last, Gandalf stood alone before the gate, staff glowing faintly, breath slow and heavy. Arondir rushed to his side. "Are you harmed?" "No," Gandalf murmured. "But the shadow's reach is longer than I feared." Inside the tower, Mogthul stared at him with awe and fear. "They will come again," the orc whispered. "Others will come." Gandalf nodded slowly. "Yes, for the relic was a beacon, and its memory has not yet faded from the world." He lifted his staff, and its light dimmed. "The burden remains," he said quietly, "and I must bear it until its path is ended." The night wind blew softly across the plains, as though smoothing the scars the battle had carved, but the air still trembled faintly with the echo of broken chants, and Gandalf knew the darkness had not been turned back, only delayed. The dawn that followed was pale and strained, as though the sun itself hesitated to rise upon the land. A thin mist clung to the plains, drifting in ghost-like ribbons past the watchtower walls. No trace remained of the shadow servants who had encircled the tower through the night. Only trampled grass, the remnants of scorched earth, and the faint scent of something old and cold lingered in the air. Gandalf descended the tower steps slowly, leaning more heavily on his staff than the night before. The clash of lights, the shattering of the dark staff, and the strange power that had woven itself through the very air had taxed him far deeper than he wished others to see. Yet his face, when he reached the courtyard, held the same calm resolve that had carried them through worse nights. The rangers were already busy. Some hauled fresh water from the nearby stream, others reinforced the gate and replaced torches. Attention remained among them, quiet, taut, but they worked with the discipline of their kind, understanding that fear yielded nothing useful in times such as these. Arondir approached, cloak wrapped tight around him. "You should rest," he said, "for an hour at least." Gandalf shook his head gently. "There is little rest left in this age, and less still in my thoughts." Arondir studied him, but pressed no further. Instead, he led Gandalf to a bench near the tower wall, where a small fire crackled in the early chill. The wizard seated himself, stretching his weary legs. Mogthul sat under guard not far away, his wrists bound, his face gaunt. The orc stared at the ground as though afraid to meet anyone's gaze, perhaps even his own. "I heard them scream," Mogthul muttered, "when you broke the staff. They screamed like beasts dragged into flame." Gandalf regarded him. They were not beasts, nor were they whole men. They were fragments, pieces claimed by a power they never understood. "And now?" Mogthul asked, a flicker of fear in his eyes. "Now they roam without a master?" "No," Gandalf said quietly. "Their bonds were severed. They will scatter and fade, but others who seek power, may yet trace the whisper of the stone." Arondir crouched by the fire, feeding a branch into the flames. "Their leader," he said, "the one with the twisted staff. Who or what was he?" Gandalf closed his eyes a moment before answering. "A sorcerer of the wild tribes, I think. One who listened too long to the mutterings of things buried deep. Such men bind themselves to whispers, believing they command them, until the whispers take root in their hearts. Arendir's mouth tightened. And his staff? An instrument of focus, Gandalf answered, not unlike the relic he served, a conduit of dark will. Shattered now, yet its memory will linger like a shard of cold beneath the skin. The ranger fell silent. After a time, a young scout approached to report that the plains were clear, though signs of the watchers remained etched in the grass. No footprints, he said uneasily, but marks, as though shadows clung too long to one place. Gandalf nodded. Let none go near them. He rose, leaning once more on his staff. We leave this place soon. The longer we remain, the greater chance something else will be drawn to the traces of last night. Arondir agreed at once. We will escort you to the southern edge of our warded lands. From there, you may go safely toward the Anduin. Gandalf's expression softened. I thank you. Their preparations were swift. Mogthul was secured more tightly, though the orc no longer fought against their ropes. He walked with the sluggish resignation of one who expected little more from the world. By late morning, the company departed the watchtower, leaving its stones to the silence of the plains. The path southward wound through fields of tall, pale grass and groves of oak and birch. Birds stirred overhead, tentative at first, but growing bolder as the sun climbed higher. The presence of life returned in slow breaths to the land, yet Gandalf's unease did not fade. At midday, they halted beside a shallow stream. The rangers drank and refilled their skins. Mogthul knelt heavily, cupping water to his lips with shaking hands. Arondir sat on a smooth stone by the bank. They came for him, he said, glancing at the orc. Would they have pursued us even without him? Yes, Gandalf answered, for they did not seek Mogthul alone. They sought what moved him. They sought the stone's echo, and last night they may have sensed it faintly upon me. Arondir's brow furrowed. Then you carry its trace? No more than a man carries the scent of smoke after standing near a fire, Gandalf replied. Yet such traces are enough for those whose minds have bent toward darkness. The ranger lowered his voice. Do you fear that other powers will take notice? Gandalf gazed southward. Yes, he said softly, and that is the burden I bear, unlifted still. When the company continued onward, the land grew gentler, rolling in soft slopes bathed in golden light. Hills rose like sleeping giants, their crowns dotted with hawthorn and gorse. The air warmed, carrying scents of wildflowers. Mogthul stumbled more than once, unused to such quiet lands. A ranger hauled him upright each time without word or pity. Near the hour of sunset, the company reached a broad ridge overlooking the Anduin far in the distance. The great river gleamed like molten silver beneath the dying light, winding its ancient path southward toward lands more familiar and less shrouded in the shadows of the north. Arondir paused. We part ways here. From this point, our road bends westward to our own outposts. Gandalf nodded. Then may your watch be steady and your vigilance unbroken. Arondir clasped his arm. And may your burden lighten as the miles pass beneath your feet. A faint smile touched Gandalf's lips. A burden shared is lessened, and yours has been shared with me in full measure. The rangers took Mogthul aside, readying him for transport to a secure stronghold. The orc looked at Gandalf, conflicted, uncertain. Fear and bitterness warred in his eyes, but beneath them lay something like a frail, cracked understanding. Wizard, Mogthul muttered, you spared me many times. Why? Gandalf looked at him steadily. Because every choice shapes the world, even the smallest. and your choices are not yet ended." Mogthul swallowed, unable to reply. The rangers led him away. Soon their figures diminished along the western path, fading into the evening haze. Gandalf stood alone on the ridge, watching until the last glimmer of their company vanished behind a distant hill. Only then did he release a long, weary breath. The land before him stretched quiet and golden. The river shimmered, welcoming. Yet even here he felt the lingering touch of the stone's memory. A cold thread woven into the tapestry of his thoughts, a whisper from the deep. He shook it off gently, turning his steps toward the river path. As he walked, he murmured to himself, "The darkness gathers threads wherever it may find them, and even small stones cast long shadows." The sun dipped below the horizon, and twilight embraced the valley. Fireflies flickered among the tall grass. The world seemed peaceful once more, but Gandalf knew peace was ever fragile, and the burden he bore had not diminished, though the road ahead led toward brighter lands. The twilight deepened as Gandalf descended the ridge and followed the winding path toward the valley of the Anduin. Evening mists drifted up from the riverbanks, soft and luminous, as though the river breathed silver into the night. Crickets stirred their steady chorus, and the whisper of flowing water wove through the quiet fields. Yet for all the land's gentleness, Gandalf walked with a furrowed brow. His stride was measured, thoughtful. The relic's shadow still clung to him like a faint chill, resisting the warmth of the evening breeze. He paused at a bend in the trail, gazing across the broad valley. To the north, the gray mountains stood as distant silhouettes, dark teeth biting toward the sky. Their presence troubled him, though miles now lay between him and the sealed chamber of Narag-Zegal. A part of him remained beneath those stones, watching, listening, waiting. "Not all burdens can be cast aside," he murmured. He resumed his walk, leaning lightly on his staff. The land sloped gently downward, and soon he reached a low stretch of meadow where the grasses waved in soft, rippling patterns beneath the rising moon. It was here, as he crossed the silvered grass, that a shape stepped quietly from the shadows of a birch grove, tall, cloaked, hood drawn low. Gandalf halted at once. "Peace," the figure said, a clear voice, soft as wind in leaves. "I am no foe to the Grey Pilgrim." Gandalf exhaled slowly. "Then show your face, friend, for this night has tested my trust." The figure lowered its hood. A young woman stood before him, slender, sharp-eyed, her hair the color of dark honey. She wore a cloak of deep green, clasped with a brooch shaped like a crescent leaf. Around her waist hung a hunting knife. Across her shoulders, a bow. Her gaze held the calm certainty of one who knew these lands well. "My name is Arelwyn," she said. "I walk the borderlands between the river and the northern vales. I have watched your coming since the sun stood high." Gandalf studied her closely. "A ranger of the north?" She nodded. "One of a scattered few. My kin keep far watch on the wilds, for darkness stirs where none should tread." "I have seen such darkness," Gandalf answered, his voice grave, "and felt its reach more keenly than I wished." Arelwyn stepped closer, eyes narrowing with concern. "I expected the rangers from the watchtower, but you walk alone." Gandalf nodded. "Our paths divided at the ridge. They take the prisoner westward." Her brow furrowed. "The orc?" "Aye, Mogthul of the northern tribes. Broken now, though far from harmless." Arelwyn's gaze drifted toward the distant mountains. "The land murmurs of restless things. My companions and I have hunted strange tracks these past nights, shapes that seem man, yet not wholly so." "Yes," Gandalf murmured. I know them well. Errolwyn's eyes widened slightly. Then you faced them. I did, Gandalf answered, and they were bound to a relic buried deep in the Grey Mountains, a relic that should never have been unearthed. A shiver passed through the young woman, though the wind was mild. Is it destroyed? No, Gandalf said. Destruction would have unleashed that which slept within. It is sealed, for now. Errolwyn looked troubled. Sealed things have a way of breaking free when the world grows restless. Indeed, Gandalf replied quietly. That is what troubles me most. She hesitated only a moment before speaking again. If such danger stirs in the north, why walk alone? The lands ahead are broad and empty, but not without threat. Gandalf managed a faint smile. I have walked lonelier roads than these, yet your concern honors me. Errolwyn studied him as though weighing her next words. If you will allow it, I shall walk with you until you reach the river. There are wolves in these parts, creatures that move with strange cunning of late, and, she hesitated, and other shadows. Gandalf inclined his head. Then I accept your company. Together they set off along the moonlit trail. Errolwyn moved with the silent confidence of a ranger, every step light and sure. Gandalf walked beside her, his staff casting a soft glow upon the path. They journeyed in companionable quiet for a time, until Errolwyn spoke. Is the relic truly lost to those who seek it? Gandalf's expression grew distant. Not lost, hidden, but the world has ways of remembering what ought to be forgotten, and shadows listen keenly for whispers of power. Errolwyn grimaced. Then those creatures that stalked the tower, they will not give up. No, Gandalf said. Their minds are bound by hunger, but their will is unsteady now. The shattering of their leader's staff scattered them like broken phantoms. Errolwyn drew a slow breath. Still, something darker lies behind all this. I feel it, as though a hand far away reaches across the land, touching things it should not. Gandalf turned his gaze toward the south, where distant hills rolled toward unseen realms. You feel truly. There is a shadow gathering, Errolwyn. Not one born in the northern mountains. No, something older, patient, cunning. The stone's awakening was but a tremor from a slumbering power. Errolwyn's hand brushed the hilt of her knife. Can it be opposed? It must be, Gandalf said. For if we falter, Middle-earth will know nights far darker than this. They descended the final slope of the valley. The sound of the river grew louder, steady, ancient, comforting. Moonlight gleamed upon its broad surface, turning the waters into a ribbon of purest light. As they neared the bank, Errolwyn stopped, scanning the shadows. Something moves, she whispered. Gandalf followed her gaze. There, across the river, stood a solitary figure upon a low rise, cloaked, motionless, watching. A chill swept through Gandalf. Not one of the watchers from the mountain. Something else. Errolwyn reached for her bow. Friend or foe? Gandalf shook his head. Neither, or perhaps both, but not one we should challenge tonight. The figure remained still, its cloak stirring faintly in the breeze. No weapon was drawn, no gesture made. It simply watched. Then, as silently as mist dissolving in sunlight, it turned and slipped into the darkness beyond the river. Errolwyn lowered her bow. What was it? A reminder, Gandalf said softly, that the world's eyes are upon us, though we may not know their gaze. She looked at him with quiet unease. The burden weighs heavier. Yes, Gandalf murmured, but I will bear it. They crossed to a sheltered bend where the river narrowed. Dawn was still hours away, yet the horizon brightened faintly, as if the sky itself sensed the growing tale. Arwen bowed her head. "I go no farther. My duty lies in the northern vales." Gandalf placed a gentle hand upon her shoulder. "May your watch be steady, Arwen. The world will need sharp eyes such as yours." "And may your path be clear," she replied, "for you walk into deeper shadows than I." With a final nod, she vanished among the birches, swift and silent. Gandalf stood alone at the river's edge, the cool breeze brushing his cloak. He looked southward, feeling the pull of distant lands and darker roads yet untraveled. The river murmured softly at his feet, and he knew. Though the stone was sealed, though the watchers were scattered, the burden within his heart had not lessened. It had only begun to reveal its true weight. The night deepened as Gandalf remained alone beside the river, the murmur of its waters flowing like an ancient lullaby across the quiet valley. Overhead, stars gathered in glittering hosts, shimmering upon the Anduin's surface like lanterns drifting upon darkened seas. A veil of mist rose from the water's edge, stirring gently around the wizard's cloak as if urging him southward. He lingered a moment longer, watching where the mysterious figure had stood across the river before vanishing into the shadows. No trace remained, only the faint outline of a grassy rise, lit by moonlight and untouched by footprints. Yet Gandalf's heart whispered that whoever, or whatever, had watched him bore knowledge of weighty things, and perhaps of what had transpired in the north. He breathed deeply and turned from the dark shore. "Enough, old wanderer," he murmured to himself. "The path waits, and burdens lighten only with each step taken forward." He waded into the shallows, the river cool around his boots. Using his staff as a guide, he crossed toward the southern bank, water rippling softly with each stride. When he emerged upon solid ground, he paused again, listening to the night. No pursuit, no watchers, no whisper of ancient spirits, only the wind, drifting peacefully between the reeds. Relief touched him, but faintly. For peace in Middle-earth was always the prelude to some new stirring darkness. And now he carried the knowledge of a relic whose echo might yet rouse powers long forgotten. He set off along the riverbank, walking between pale grasses that swayed beneath the moon. The Anduin's gentle glow accompanied him, its presence steady and sure. As he traveled, the land seemed to exhale slowly, shedding the weight of shadow with each mile. Yet still Gandalf sensed threads, thin, elusive threads, connecting the sealed chamber of Naragzigil to distant, unseen corners of the world. And as he walked, he began to understand the true shape of the burden laid upon him. For when the stone had flared beneath the chieftain's hand, something else had flared with it, something that had reached out far beyond the gray mountains, like the twitching of a vast dark net awakening to movement. He did not know its full nature, not yet, but he feared he knew its source. These thoughts lingered heavy as Gandalf followed a narrow deer path leading into a small glen tucked between low hills. The river narrowed here, murmuring beside mossy stones. A fallen tree formed a natural seat, and though he did not often rest by choice, tonight he allowed himself this small pause. He sat, easing his weary bones, and set his staff across his knees. The glen was peaceful, fireflies floating like soft sparks through the grass. A faint breeze stirred the leaves overhead. For a long while, Gandalf stared at the earth, deep in thought. When he finally spoke, it was to the empty air. "The relic was touched by a will older than its stone," he whispered. "A will that bent the sorcerer's staff and guided the watcher's steps. A will that has been stirring in secret halls and far-off lands." He lifted his gaze toward the south, But why reveal itself now? Why risk drawing attention to its whispers? No answer came, only the rustling of leaves. He tightened his grip on his staff. The burden he bore was not merely the memory of the stone, nor the danger it still posed. It was the knowledge that the world's peace was fragile, a thin crust of ice over deep, unseen currents. He rose, smoothing his cloak. "I must seek counsel," he murmured. "The White Council must hear this tale. Saruman must hear it. For though he doubts shadows, even he cannot ignore such signs forever." His voice softened. "And if he does, then I must seek another road." With renewed resolve, he left the glen, returning to the river path. The moon traveled westward, and the first hints of dawn shimmered faintly at the horizon. The colors of the world began their slow transformation, from silver to pale gold. As the sky brightened, Gandalf approached a small ford where a thin line of stones rose above the water. Beyond it lay the wooded eaves of the western Anduin, where a narrow road wound toward the south, toward the lands of Rohan, toward the long, watchful borders of Gondor, and toward the White City that glimmered like a beacon in troubled times. Yet Gandalf hesitated, turning once more to look north. The gray mountains lay hidden now behind veils of blue morning haze, but he could almost feel them still, their weight, their silence, their secrets. He lifted his staff in a small gesture of farewell. "Rest, Nargzigil. Rest while you may. Your burden is sealed, yet not forever." The wind answered softly, brushing the grasses in a gentle wave. Then Gandalf turned and stepped onto the ford, crossing stone by stone until he reached the far side. The rising sun cast its first warm glow upon the land, touching his cloak with faint light. Birds stirred in the branches. The world awakened. And though the burden remained, deep, cold, and unlifted, Gandalf straightened his back and walked southward with quiet determination. For burdens were not meant to be escaped. They were meant to be carried until the time came to set them down. And that time, he knew, was still far ahead. But he would bear it. For Middle-earth, for the free peoples, for the hope that still flickered against the gathering shadow. And as the gray wizard strode into the golden morning, the tale of Nargzigil sank into silence once more, sealed beneath stone and memory, while the great story of the age continued its turning, slowly drawing all things toward the long road yet to come.